Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room on this Friday. I'm Devin Dwyer at ABC News in Washington, joined by our political director, Rick Klein. Great to be with Rick today on this big day of ABC News exclusives. George Stephanopoulos, our chief anchor, sitting down overnight with the man at the center of the news this week, Michael Cohen, the president's fixer, former attorney, who is now going to jail 3 years behind bars for those crimes we've been talking about here in the Briefing Room all week long. Fascinating interview that George had, hearing from Michael Cohen on his latest thoughts about President Trump, just what involvement the president had in those payments to women during the campaign, why the president allegedly issued those directives to Michael Cohen, and why Michael Cohen took the president at his word, didn't warn the president that this was illegal. Let's start with that, Rick, and we can kind of break this down. We're going to take a look at three of the big headlines out of this interview today, and there were many of them, starting with Michael Cohen's response to President Trump, who says he just didn't know that payments to these people were wrong. Here's what Michael Cohen had to say.
He's saying very clearly that he never directed you to do anything wrong. Is that true?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. First of all, nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me, as I said in my allocution, and I said as well in the plea, he directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal, which was really between him and David Pecker, and then David Pecker's counsel. I just reviewed the documents in order to protect him. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
And he was doing that to help his election?
You have to remember at what point in time that this matter came about, 2 weeks or so before the election, post the Billy Bush comments. So yes, he was very concerned about how this would affect the election.
A pretty damning statement, Rick, and even if you doubt Michael Cohen's credibility, what's fascinating on that very point is that the Southern District of New York, federal prosecutors put it in their charging document. They agree, and they seem to indicate they have other evidence to support what Michael Cohen's saying.
And this explodes some of the major defenses that the Trump team has put up to say, first of all, that this was a lawyer's decision. Michael Cohen says, actually, no, this is Mr. Trump's decision to do this, and that it wasn't about a campaign contribution. That's where the legality comes into this. But as crazy as it might be, it's not illegal on its face to pay hush money to someone to not talk about something, but it is illegal to do so if you're helping a campaign and to not report that.
What do you make of the president's excuse? The president seems to be saying, look, I got bad legal advice. That's the bottom line of the president's defense on that point. Do you think that holds water? I mean, neither of us are legal analysts, but it seems to be that this question on the payments boils down to, should the president have known, could he be culpable by simply issuing a direction? Hey, Michael Cohen, just fix this for me. Well, is that enough to be in trouble?
Number one, that's like his third or fourth explanation for this, right? Originally, he said he didn't know anything about it. You had to ask Michael Cohen. But even if you know the snippet that we have on tape where they're talking about this surreptitiously recorded by Cohen, and you add on to that whatever other documentation there might be, there's reporting out there that he was part of meetings on this. It really hangs a lot on the president's ability to prove that he didn't know anything, when every indication at every stage has been that his word has not been good. It has not been honest with people at every step of the way. So if there's any way to tie this together and show Trump's knowledge of it, knowledge that this was done in a particular way to try to hide scrutiny, all of that's very bad news for the president and his organization.
Yeah, many of the president's critics pointing out he hasn't been truthful before. Why should we believe his explanation now? Much more to come on that, of course. But Michael Cohen also revealing a side of the president in his interview with George Stephanopoulos that we rarely get to see from people who were on the inside. In this clip we're going to share with you, Michael Cohen, the president's attorney, talks about how he thinks the president is basically in over his head right now. Take a listen.
You know, I can't give you a specific time that it went from point A to point B. It was just a change. I will tell you that the gentleman that is sitting now in the Oval Office, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, is not the Donald Trump that I remember from Trump Tower. He's a very different individual.
What's happened to him?
I think the pressure of the job is much more than what he thought it was going to be. It's not like the Trump Organization where he would bark out orders and people would blindly follow what he wanted done. There's a system here. He doesn't understand the system. And it's sad because the country has never been more divisive. And one of the hopes that I have out of the punishment that I've received, as well as the cooperation that I have given, I will be remembered in history as helping to bring this country back together.
I want to bring in our White House reporter, Catherine Falders, who had also covered the Trump campaign. She knows Michael Cohen very well. Catherine, you know, one of the things that struck me about that clip was that Michael Cohen actually seems to affirm what has been, in some cases, the president's defense in all this. Look, I'm a businessman. I don't understand the system. I haven't been in Washington. I don't know the rules. It's something you've heard time and time again from this White House, but now it does seem to be that line may not hold water with federal prosecutors.
Exactly, and he's said that. And look, it's still a question of whether he's willing to listen to those around him in the West Wing now. You heard Cohen say that at the Trump Organization, he would bark out orders to people, and that he believes it's the pressure of this job and being in the White House, that it's an organization that he's struggling with. Well, you've heard that time and time again from advisors, from former cabinet officials who have left this place for that very reason, that they've later gone on to say on the record. And the other point I was struck by that you and Rick were discussing was the fact that the president is blaming this on what he calls bad legal advice, tweeting that out, minimizing Michael Cohen's role in giving him legal advice. But the reality was those two were very close. Cohen worked with him for a very long time, said he'd do anything to protect him. His office was just a stone's throw away from the president's in Trump Tower, and he was his personal attorney for years. So it's definitely more than just bad legal advice here, Devin.
And Catherine, the president hasn't tweeted or weighed in on the interview just yet. In fact, the White House has been relatively muted, but we do know that Deputy Spokesman Hogan Gidley was out on the North Lawn giggling with you guys a little bit earlier today. Here's what he had to say about the White House reaction to Michael Cohen's interview with George. Take a listen.
To give credence to a convicted criminal who has lied on multiple occasions and self-admitted doing just that is quite frankly laughable. The president has maintained and has said many times he has never instructed Michael Cohen to do anything illegal, and we stand by that. Look, I don't know about that particular part of the private conversation. I know what the president has maintained, that he's never instructed Michael Cohen to break any laws. The fact is, Michael Cohen's a convicted criminal, and the FBI had him dead to rights. And what he decided to do was to reduce his sentence. And in the meantime, he cut a deal and betrayed a former employer.
Part of their defense, Rick, also, in addition to the president maybe not knowing the rules, is that this guy is a serial liar, has lied before, pled guilty to lying, and is lying again as a convicted convict. I mean, where do you think how do you think that will play, at least in the public eye? Public opinion is what matters here at the end of the day, since so much of this talk leads up to potential, talk of impeachment and other things, a political decision. The public opinion on this will really matter more than anything.
Yeah, he's not an ideal witness. Clearly, he has said enough and admitted to enough lies to the FBI and to the public and to Congress to undercut any of his testimony. You could also argue that the president has been just as untruthful in many directions. And I'd add to that, though, that the relationship is important. And I think that second clip that we played gets to that relationship. These two were extremely close. You know, I first interviewed Michael Cohen back in 2011 when Donald Trump was talking about potentially running. He seemed to be a bit of a kingmaker at the time. Michael Cohen memorably calls him the godfather of politics at that time. And they did have a brotherly or maybe a father and son type relationship. This was the man that said famously that he would take a bullet for Donald Trump. And the fact that he has turned on him in this way may color this the way that anyone considers what his testimony is, because yes, he lied, but actually in his telling now, he was lying to help Donald Trump. It's only now that he is saying, I'm telling the truth to try to come clean. He feels liberated by this. And what he's saying about the president and how he's conducting himself, I think it carries particular weight given how close they once were.
He does want to create this image of himself as sort of helping to heal the nation, in his words. In fact, here's what he told George about what role he plans to play in the conversation going forward after he gets out of prison. Take a listen.
You lied for him for a long time.
More than 10 years.
Why?
Out of loyalty. Out of loyalty to him. I followed a bad path, and hence how we started this conversation. I have my freedom, and I will not be the villain, as I told you once before. I will not be the villain of his story.
Well, but you pleaded guilty to lying to Congress.
Yes,
So why should we believe you now?
because the special counsel stated emphatically that the information that I gave to them was credible and helpful. There's a substantial amount of information that they possess that corroborates the fact that I am telling the truth.
So you're done with the lying.
I am done with the lying. I am done being loyal to President Trump. And my first loyalty belongs to my wife, my daughter, my son, and this country.
And the reverberations, Rick, from this interview reaching Capitol Hill today, members of Congress weighing in on this already. Senator Hatch, one of the president's most loyal foot soldiers in the Senate, saying, well, this actually gives him maybe a little bit of pause, affirming the Mueller investigation. And even, looking back to Sunday before this interview, people like Marco Rubio expressing some concern. So sort of caution is in the air amongst Republicans as more and more of these shoes drop with this investigation.
And we should be cautious how we frame this. It's not like the dam is broken and Republicans are jumping
Correct.
ship. But what is happening is you're starting to see cracks in that wall, that solid wall that has surrounded the president. And these may be the early indicators when you see people like Rubio and Hatch expressing these concerns.
Now, one of the people that will help President Trump navigate all of this in the new year is going to be his new chief of staff. The president today making some news on that front as well, holding court at the White House in the Oval Office. No public schedule today, but interviewing people for his chief of staff, making clear he's going to take his time. We'll bring Catherine Faulders back into the conversation. Catherine, we heard from Hogan Gidley this morning that the president has 5 people on the list. He even suggested that John Kelly could stick around because the president does seem to be having some trouble making a decision or getting someone to agree to take the job.
Yeah, this is an interesting shift from what the president said just yesterday, saying that he was having no problem finding a new chief of staff and interviewing folks. Well, Kellyanne Conway went on TV last night, and then Hogan Gidley, the deputy press secretary, again today. And they both suggested that Kelly could actually stay into the new year while the president still makes his decision. But at the same time, Hogan said that he also said that a decision on this was imminent. So to me, those are two separate things in a sense.
Yeah,
But
and he did say that some of the names have come off the list. I mean, the list here has dramatically changed in the past 24 hours. People like Mark Meadows, who had been a front runner, bowed out. The White House said thanks, but no thanks. You were hearing, Catherine, that Jared Kushner, there was a lot of speculation whether the president's son-in-law could even be in the mix here.
Yeah, there was some speculation and reports that he may be in the mix. But Kellyanne Conway talked to us a little earlier today, and she said that she had not heard Kushner mention, that she had not heard the president mention that. And Devin, another name out again today is the former New Jersey Governor Christie, who we're told spoke with the president about this job last night. He's taken himself out of the running, but 2 people who were over here today, Dave Bossie, who was one of his former campaign top aides, along with, we hear that he's being interviewed, but he was also, you see them leaving there with the former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. Now, we know from our sources that Bossie is high on the president's list, but who knows?
Yeah, Bossie's a pit bull. Christie also a pit bull, but he took himself out of the running. Rick, you gave him a phone call a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
He's not talking right now about what that meeting was like, but he did put out a statement.
You put out a statement saying it wasn't the right time for him or his family. I always had a hard time thinking about Chris Christie in this role, not just because he's an ABC News contributor these days, so he's often on our air, but he's used to being a principal. And to get in at this moment, you can see a lot of good things that might come out of a Chris Christie in there as chief of staff. I think he would have the stature to do the job. He knows the president and his relationships very, very well. But we've seen already with the 2 chiefs of staff he's had so far, the president doesn't really want a chief of staff. He doesn't.
Office manager.
Yeah, it's a little bit of traffic control,
Yeah.
but it's a hard job to maintain if you're not actually empowered to do the job. My sense all along has been Christie would only do this job if he could do it his way, and I'm not clear that there was ever going to be a way that he could do his way with President Trump.
And Christie, like several of the other candidates, have expressed reservations about stepping into this while the Mueller investigation is still going on. They may be interested in the job once the smoke clears from that, but they don't want to be navigating the ship through the storm. Fun footnote to all the chief of staff speculation, a critical position in the White House. We got a little look last night of the two, well, the former chief of staff and the soon-to-be former chief of staff at the White House holiday party. There's Reince Priebus on the right, John Kelly. And fun fact, Rick, before we move on, Washington Post reporting Reince Priebus may be joining the Navy, of all things. Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, has recommended Reince Priebus to be a naval reservist.
I didn't see that coming. Sean Spicer, by the way, is still a naval
That's
reservist.
right. They can join the ship together. All right, moving on to another very significant story today, driving the conversation in this town. Immigration has been a hot topic to close out the year, of course. But a story in the Washington Post about a 7-year-old Guatemala girl killed, who died in custody of U.S. Border Patrol agents after suffering from thirst and dehydration, drawing a lot of outrage in this town about the crisis situation on the border and how the Trump administration is handling a lot of these migrants that are pouring in. Big question now, who's to blame? Does the administration bear any responsibility? We're joined by phone with ABC News contributor Jon Cohen. He's a former DHS official. He oversaw a lot of these immigration issues during the Obama administration. John, I want to get your take on the situation with the death of this little girl, a tragedy all around. Everybody seems to agree on that, but there does seem to be a good bit of debate over whether the administration did enough to prevent her death. What's your take?
Well, we've heard that the Inspector General is now going to investigate the death, and that shouldn't be a surprise because any time there is an in-custody death, whether it's an adult or a juvenile, it needs to be investigated. It needs to be investigated, and we need to understand very clearly what happened. So the investigators will look at, were there any indications when the child was first came into contact with the Border Patrol officer that she was sick. They'll look at the circumstances in which they came into contact. It sounds like they were part of a group of migrants who voluntarily approached, after illegally crossing the border, a Border Patrol officer and turned themselves into them. And if they claimed asylum at that point, or if they said they were seeking asylum at that point, that would be considered that would be consistent with law. So they would be in a legal process. So that's the other thing the investigators will look at. But again, this is somebody who was in custody for close to or over 8 hours. It's a horrible tragedy. It's going to be fully investigated, as well it should be.
And I understand the Trump administration has also asked Mexico to look into any culpability of the smugglers who brought this family, brought the father and the daughter along as well. John, I want to ask you sort of more broadly. ABC News, our Tom Yamas just recently conducted an investigation for Nightline on some of the healthcare facilities, the resources that are treating these record numbers of migrants at the border. And he found the systems down there are way overstressed. In fact, this death of this little girl is just one example of many sort of crisis situations for detainees. I mean, give us your sense of how difficult that is for DHS and CBP to handle the health concerns here, and from your study of the issue, what more needs to be done right now?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, in the time that I have worked alongside CBP and ICE, I found the people that work for those organizations to be truly professionals and very good planners, meaning they understood the challenges at the border, and when they anticipated, based on intelligence or other information, that there would be a surge. In the years that I worked with them, they were always very good about coming to the department and making the case for the resources they needed to deal with the surge that they were anticipating. We have now, though, in the Trump administration, seen multiple situations, whether it was the initial rollout of the travel restrictions, whether it was the rollout of the zero tolerance program, whether it was how they dealt with the caravan, even though they had many weeks' notice it was coming, where they don't seem to be prepared. And the problem is that political rhetoric does not keep people safe. And for some reason, which I fully cannot understand, we have had multiple situations now where the healthcare resources, the processing resources, and the resources to ensure that people who are presenting themselves at the border are handled in a safe manner, they just don't seem to be there. So I think as the new Congress comes in, you're going to see a very hard look at whether adequate resources and adequate planning is being used in order to deal with a situation at the border, which on any given day is fluid and requires careful planning.
All right, Jon Cohen, ABC News contributor, former DHS acting undersecretary. Thank you so much, John, for dialing in for that analysis. Rick, as John was just saying, the issues of the border, immigration, front and center right now in a funding fight to keep the government running into the new year, and we'll begin the new year with this issue on the table, it sounds like. What are you hearing from sources about where things stand with this possible government shutdown? We have just a week. 1 week from tomorrow, parts of the government will run out of money just days before Christmas.
And I wouldn't underestimate the human side of this, which I think is re-injected with the death of the 7-year-old. There are several prominent Democrats who will be down on the border even this weekend. Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, who did so much to highlight the issue in the first place, and Beto O'Rourke, the congressman from El Paso. They're making this trip at a time where we are talking about these border issues. And I think that when we close out this week, you remember how Nancy Pelosi seemed to best Donald Trump at his own game a couple of days ago by getting President Trump to own that shutdown. The fact that there's no members of Congress in town right now, and they're not coming back until very close to that deadline, to me, it's a signal that they know they don't have the votes to get the president his border wall. They don't really want the border wall themselves. And a lot of these retiring members of Congress that feel like the president's rhetoric on immigration is in part what hurt them, are they going to go and risk a government shutdown in the closing days, given the backdrop of these other issues? It seems increasingly unlikely. So I think a shutdown is maybe slightly less likely, but it's not because President Trump's set to get his way.
That's right.
It's that Nancy Pelosi really called the bluff.
She did, and we're also hearing from the White House, to bring Catherine Faulders back into this, there is some talks right now, very minimal talk, as Rick said, but a little glimmer that perhaps, at the very least, Republicans, President Trump, will agree to some short-term CR here, short-term fix to get us through Christmas at least, and let these hundreds of thousands of government workers who would not be paid around the holidays to be able to continue on. Are you hearing anything new, Catherine, over there?
Yeah, there's been some reporting that he's considering, that Trump is considering delaying this border wall fight until January. We're seeing some talk of maybe a 2-week extension, but the reality is that Democrats want to take care of this now. They don't really want to drag it in to next year. And just some new bit of reporting from Miriam Khan up on Capitol Hill. A Democratic congressional aide tells her, quote, the only thing a 2-week CR would accomplish is that President Trump would lose twice.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll see if the president sheds any light on his take on that one over the weekend and into next week. Catherine Faulders at the White House, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Rick, before we go today, a couple of quick hitters here. What's going on in Wisconsin? Today, Governor Scott Walker, outgoing, just days left in his term, signed some legislation that severely restricts the powers of the incoming Democratic governor, Tony Evers, and the Democratic legislature. This is a pretty significant move on his part, getting a lot of blowback, but he was defiant today signing the bill.
This was started by Republican lawmakers who were frankly a little surprised that Evers won the election just a few weeks ago. Walker's been in power there for the last 8 years. And frankly, these Republicans said, we don't trust the new guy. We don't think that he's got enough juice with us that we can even trust him with the powers that the previous governor had. So they passed a package of bills that Governor Walker had not asked for that would curtail the next governor's power. Yeah, Governor Walker today said, look, I'm the governor right up and through the first week of January.
How unusual is this? I mean, how unusual is it for a state, an outgoing party in a given state, to tie the hands of the incoming in some of the ways you're seeing right here on the screen? I mean, limiting the governor's power over agencies, as you see here, preventing the attorney general from being able to pull out of the Affordable Care Act lawsuit, obviously very controversial, new voting restrictions and the like. How unusual is that?
There's a template because it happened in North Carolina just 2 years ago. But other than that, look, legislatures do things like this, but this kind of concerted effort, it happened here, it's happening in Michigan as well. I was struck by the piece of this around the Affordable Care Act, because if there's one thing that Evers made clear he was going to do differently than Scott Walker, it was to include the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare.
Signature part of his plan.
It was a huge part of his plan, and many Democrats around the country ran on this. So for the legislators to specifically say, look, you can't get out of that lawsuit, even though you told everyone you were going to do it, that is a direct smackdown to the people that just voted for Tony Evers. There are going to be legal challenges, maybe with the incoming governor as part of it, but it is going to be quite a fight in the new year and beyond.
So stay tuned there on Wisconsin, a key state for the presidential election as well. A lot of eyes on Wisconsin. Finally today, our eyes a little bit on the Supreme Court. On tomorrow marking the 227th anniversary of ratification of the Bill of Rights, if you can believe it. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Well, today, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, after that health scare a month ago, made her first public appearance at a naturalization ceremony for 31 of the newly minted Americans, and she gave the address there. I happened to be there. She talked about the importance, wait for it, of immigration, immigrants, people coming into this country to seek a better life. Here's a little bit about what she had to say, throwing some shade, perhaps.
We are a nation made strong by people like you, people who traveled long distances, overcame great obstacles, and made tremendous sacrifices, all to provide a better life for themselves and their families.
It looks like she was speaking in a cave. That's actually in the National Archives, Rick, right in front of the very
lighting.
delicate original Constitution document, so they don't let any lights come on. But, you know, it was very interesting to hear her. She's obviously wading very deliberately into, she could talk about citizenship, the importance of being a citizen. She talked very specifically about immigration, diversity, the stains on America's legacy when it comes to immigration. You know, it might be going too far to say that she was directly rebuking the president or anything like that, but it's not lost on anybody, given her past track record, that she was very deliberate in her message there.
RBG doesn't play coincidence games.
She does not.
There was a message there. I'm with you, Devin.
She's back. Thank you for joining us here in the briefing room today at 3:30. Hope you have a great weekend. You can follow the latest on all of these stories by downloading the ABC News app, abcnews.com. Be sure to join us Monday, 3:30, right back here in the briefing room on ABC News Live. Check out The Note, Rick Klein's signature analysis piece there. Have a great weekend. For Rick, I'm Devin Dwyer. We'll see you next time.